Dare to Oppose Part 2, Parallel World, Book 4. Written and narrated by Christine Kersey. Chapter 16. Morgan. Seeing Billy panic was a rare thing. The only other time I'd seen him lose his cool was when we'd viewed the video of me being tortured. That had upset him for sure. But I could understand his reticence in seeing his parents in this world, especially since this world's Billy had died. How could he possibly approach them when seeing him would be so hurtful? "Thanks, Morgan," he said as he handed me the last dish to load into the dishwasher. "You would totally do the same thing for me," I said. He laughed. "Yeah, but this is going to be a lot trickier than giving someone a ride to a tunnel that may or may not lead to an alternate universe." "Ha," I said, "that was not easy, especially with Hansen and the rest of the enforcers after us." He grinned. "Exactly." What was he implying? That it would be harder to find and talk to his parents in this world than to deal with Hansen and the rest of the enforcers? "Do you really think it will be that hard to talk to them?" I asked. "Of course," he said. "I mean, how can we explain how Billy is suddenly alive and well?" I chewed on the inside of my lip, then I grabbed the sponge and wiped down the counter. Yeah, that could present a problem. Once the kitchen was sparkling clean, I took Billy by the hand and said, "Let's see where they live." His eyes widened. "Now? Like, right now?" "It's not like they'll know we're looking them up." I couldn't hold back a giggle. "Besides, they won't be able to see you through the internet." He rolled his eyes. "I know." "Okay then, let's go." We went to the computer in the corner of the living room, and I sat in the chair while Billy stood beside me. We quickly found the obituary for Billy Foster that we'd found before, and a few minutes later we had his parents' address. Using a mapping program, I pinpointed exactly where they lived, then I turned to Billy. "They're an hour south of here." "Uh-huh." His focus was glued to the map on the screen. "When do you want to go?" He looked at me. "Not yet, okay? I'm not ready." "I was just asking." His eyes went back to the screen. "Maybe I can wear a disguise." He turned to me and laughed. "You can be like Bryn." I thought about the girl who had cut and dyed my hair in an attempt to hide my identity, and I smiled. "Yeah, that could be fun." I imagined how I could change his look. Hair extensions, glasses, a fake mustache and goatee. Yeah, that could work. "We should go to the store tomorrow," I said. "Why?" "To see what we can use for your disguise." "Why do you need a disguise?" Zach asked as he leaned on the desk next to me. "We were just joking," Billy said. Then he ruffled Zach's hair. "Hey, do you have any more card tricks to show me?" Zach's face brightened with excitement. "Yeah, I'll get my stuff." When Zach bounded up the stairs, I turned to Billy with a smile. "Good distraction." He laughed. "I figured you wouldn't want to explain to your parents why we were talking about disguises." No. Later that evening, after Dad left to drive Billy to Tasco's house, Mom pulled me aside. "You didn't come up with that slogan that Amy's using, did you, Morgan?" My heart pounded at the expression on her face. I hesitated. "No, it's from the pledge I had to learn when I was, well, there." Her lips compressed. "That's what I suspected." The fact that she'd even considered that possibility led me to think that she still believed my story. "Mom, the other day you sounded like you were beginning to doubt what I told you. About, being in an alternate reality." She sighed. "To be honest, Morgan, I was starting to doubt it. I mean, in the cold light of day, it seems pretty fantastic." Her lips curved into a small smile. "But after listening to your impassioned argument about this new junk food rule, and after learning about the slogan you came up with on the fly," she nodded, "I'm starting to get more comfortable with your story." Relieved to hear this, I decided to tell her about Billy's desire to find his parents. I briefly explained what his parents had done to him in his world, then told her how spending time with our family had kindled a desire in him to see what his parents in our world were like, in the hopes that they were different from the parents who'd raised him. "I understand why he wants to learn more about them," she said, "but that decision is fraught with so many issues I hardly know where to begin." "He just wants a family," I said. The thought made me inexorably sad. That's all? Mom was quiet. Then her eyes became bright with unshed tears. That breaks my heart, Morgan. I know, me too. Which is why I'm going to help him. We already found their address. Morgan. Mom's tone showed a warning. It's okay, Mom. He doesn't want to go there yet. Where do they live? She asked. An hour from here. She stared at me. Tell you what, when he's ready to go there, let me know. She paused, like she was deciding if she really wanted to say what was on her mind. Maybe I can take him. That was unexpected. Really? I think so, she said. Maybe. I laughed. Okay, well, when he feels ready to go, I'll let you know. She pulled me into a hug. I'd rather know what's going on than have you do it behind my back. Okay, Mom. I hugged her in return, happy that I could share something so important with her. After she released me, she smiled. I have something for you. What? I asked. She turned and went into her bedroom, and I followed. Opening one of her dresser drawers, she said, Dad and I talked about this, and we decided you could have this back. When I saw my cell phone in her hand, I was excited to have it back, but I was also eager to prove that I was grateful for all my parents did for me. She held it out to me. Would you like it back? I hesitated. Sure, why not? Mom looked perplexed. I thought you'd be thrilled to take it back. It's just that I don't want you to think I'm the same girl you had to take it away from. She smiled. I don't, Morgan. I've seen a change in you since you came home. I know your experience changed you. You've adjusted your priorities. Her words pleased me. You can see that, really? Of course. I see the way you're treating your siblings now, your willingness to help out, the way you take your studies more seriously. She handed me the phone. You've earned this, Morgan. I gave her a quick hug. Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate you letting me have a phone. I know you do, which is why I don't mind letting you have it. I smiled. I guess I'll get ready for bed. Okay. Good night, Morgan. Good night, Mom. A feeling of peace settled over me as I walked to my room. When I'd been locked up in Camp Willowmoss, the hope that I would eventually get home to my family was what had kept me going. But that hope had vanished when I'd been locked in my room at Camp Stonewater. I'd really come to believe that I wouldn't be able to get away and that I would be trapped in that world for the rest of my life. Now, grateful beyond words to be home, I got ready for bed and climbed under the covers, secure in the knowledge that my parents were there for me, no matter what. Chapter 17. Billy. How are things going with Richard? Morgan's dad asked as he drove me to Tasco's house. Good, I said. I'm glad to hear that. He paused. What about school? Are things going all right there? It was weird to have someone ask me those questions and to know he was actually interested. I liked it. My own parents had never been that interested in my life. Yeah, I said. Morgan has helped me figure stuff out. That's great, he said. A few minutes later, we reached Tasco's house, and Morgan's dad pulled into the driveway. Thanks for the ride, I said. No problem, he said. I opened the door. Billy? I looked at him. If you need anything, just let me know, okay? In the illumination of the car's interior light, I could see the sincerity on his face. Thanks, I will. He nodded, then I climbed out of his car and went into the house. I heard voices coming from the laundry room down the hall, and I went to see what was going on. Tasco stood in front of the washing machine looking baffled. Hi, I said. He turned and looked at me with a frown. Hey. I thought I heard voices. He laughed. That was me talking to this stupid beast. It's getting old, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep it going. He sighed. The agitator's not working again, right when I was in the middle of doing a load of laundry. I set my backpack on the floor. Mind if I take a look? Obviously unsure if I would really help or just make things worse, he stared at me. Do you know anything about washing machines? I'd never actually worked on a washing machine, but I was good at fixing things. I know how things work, I said. Still seeming uncertain, he took a step back and murmured, At this point I'm going to have to call a repairman regardless. I won't break it, I said with a laugh. I promise. Okay, I suppose you can take a look, but don't touch anything important." As if he knows what is or isn't important on this machine, I thought. Holding back a smirk, I pulled the washer away from the wall, then faced Tasco. "Do you have any tools I can use?" He hesitated, like he was afraid I would do some sort of damage while he was gone. Finally he said, "Yeah, I'll grab them." A couple of minutes later, he returned and set the toolbox on top of the dryer. "Thanks," I said. I opened the lid of the toolbox and dug around until I found the right screwdriver. Then I used it to remove the rear panel. Tasco stood over me as I scrutinized the machinery, and after a short while I pinpointed the problem. The whole time I worked, Tasco stayed right beside me, but the moment the agitator began doing its job again, Tasco's whole demeanor changed. "You actually fixed it," he said, clearly shocked that I hadn't made the washing machine explode in a torrent of water and suds. He laughed. "I'll admit it. I had my doubts, but you surprised me, Billy." He smiled. "I'm impressed." It felt odd to be praised for something that seemed to come naturally to me, but I liked it, especially after I'd proven his doubts wrong. "No problem." He chuckled. "If you have time after school tomorrow, maybe you can take a look at my lawnmower. The lawn won't be ready to be mowed until spring, of course, but it would be nice to know that the mower is working." "Sure," I said. I was glad to be able to contribute, and I smiled. "Do you have anything else that needs fixing?" "Probably. I'm not too handy, so your skills would be greatly appreciated." He paused. "In fact, I'd be happy to pay you for your work." Though I liked the idea of earning my own money, he was already letting me stay in his home for free. I wasn't sure how comfortable I was with him paying me on top of that. "That's okay," I said. "You don't have to pay me." He laughed. "Oh, come on now. You need spending money, don't you?" I couldn't argue with that, so I shrugged. "Okay then," he said. "Fixing my washing machine just now saved me from having to call a repairman." He took his wallet out of his back pocket and removed 2 $20 bills, then he held them out to me. I hesitated. "Take it," he said. "You saved me way more than this." Except for the few pieces of clothing Morgan's mom had bought me, I had nothing. No money, no clothes, nothing. I took the cash, though it felt strange for Tasco to be so nice. Maybe people in this world really were different. "Thanks," I said. "You're welcome." I stuffed the money into my pocket, then went up to the bedroom Tasco was letting me use. I'd only spent 2 nights at Tasco's house so far, and slowly but surely it was beginning to feel like a place I could call home. Chapter 18. Morgan. The next day at school, several kids came up to me and said they liked what I had said in the assembly and that they agreed with me. As good as that made me feel, I didn't think it would make any difference to the people who had made the decision to disallow junk food to be sold at school. "I got my cell phone back," I said to Billy when he met me in the cafeteria at lunch. "That's good," he said, as we got in line to get our food. "I guess my mom's not mad at me anymore for running away." Remembering the conversation I'd had with her the night before, I smiled, then dropped my voice to a whisper so that the other kids couldn't overhear. "I think she's really starting to believe our story now." Billy laughed, but in his normal voice he said, "Well, it's true, so I should hope so." "What's true?" Rochelle asked as she got in line behind us and picked up a tray. "Oh, hey," I said, my mind racing to recall if I'd said anything to give away our secret. "What Morgan said in the assembly yesterday," Billy said smoothly. "Oh, that," Rochelle said. She didn't say anything more, and the 3 of us took our trays to an empty table. "Do you guys want to do anything after school?" Rochelle asked. "Sure," I said, then shifted my eyes to Billy. "Yeah, okay," he said. Then he smiled. "As long as I have time to work." "Work?" I asked, puzzled. "Do you have a job?" "I fixed Tasco's washing machine last night and he gave me $40, and then he asked me to fix some other stuff." "Nice." Though surprised that Tasco would pay him to work, I was glad. I knew it was important to Billy to earn his own way. After school, the 3 of us headed to the mall in Rochelle's car. I was able to call Mom on my cell phone, and she gave me permission to go, this time without the hour restriction. "I think I'm going to get one of those smoothies again," Billy said from the back seat as Rochelle angled into a parking space. From the front, I turned and smiled at him. Don't forget about those cinnamon rolls. I looked at Rochelle. What about you? She cleared her throat. I'm skipping a snack today. Oh, I said. Okay. She laughed in what seemed a self-conscious way. Can we look at that jacket first? Sure, I said. The three of us walked in and went right to the store with a jacket that Rochelle was interested in. She put it on and stood in front of us. What do you guys think? It's cute on you, I said. Looks good, Billy said, though I could tell it didn't matter to him one way or the other. You think so? Rochelle asked as she focused on Billy. He nodded. Yeah. I'm going to get it, she said. Then she walked to the counter where the sales girl waited. After she paid for it, we walked toward the food court where Billy and I got in line at the smoothie place. Are you sure you're not going to get anything? I asked Rochelle. She bit her lip. Not today. I guess she could tell I was curious why she was skipping a snack, because she added, After the whole junk food conversation, I've decided to try to eat healthier. Oh, I said. That's good, I guess. She looked fine to me, but I couldn't argue with the idea of choosing healthier foods. As Billy and I sipped our smoothies, I caught Rochelle eyeing them. They have smoothies that are just fruit, you know, I said. They're good for you. She murmured. Okay. Then she got in line to get a fruit smoothie. After Rochelle got her smoothie, the three of us walked around the mall for a while, and when Billy slid his hand into mine, happiness flooded me. How could life get any better? When we were done at the mall, Rochelle dropped Billy and me off at Tasco's house where Billy led me out to the garage. Let me grab you a chair, he said. Then he brought one of the kitchen chairs out to the garage. Thanks. Are you warm enough? He asked. Pulling my coat more tightly around me, I nodded, then watched Billy as he moved the lawnmower into the middle of the garage and began working. So, I began, do you like living with Tasco? He looked up. He's okay. From the small amount of time I've spent with him, he seems a lot different from the man we knew at Camp Willowmoss. I was glad to hear that. Then I thought about Holly, the one who'd argued with me at the assembly, not the one in the other world. Was this world's Holly any different from the Holly who had tortured me at the Camp Stonewater? With any luck, I would never see her again and would always have to wonder. I might need some parts to get this thing to work, Billy said as he fiddled with a lawnmower. If that's all Tasco has to do to get it to work, then he's getting a bargain by having you fix stuff. Billy smiled. It's cool that I can earn money doing stuff that I would do for free. Yeah, that is pretty awesome. Let me get cleaned up, then we can go to your house. He paused, like he was uncertain if he should invite himself over. If that's okay? I laughed. Of course it is. You're always welcome at my house. Chapter 19. Billy. When we arrived at Morgan's house, her younger brothers were kicking the soccer ball around in the front yard, trying to keep it away from Goldie, who seemed determined to catch it. Hey guys, I said. Hi Billy, Zach said. Come play with us. Yeah, added Brandon, please. I didn't have any siblings, and since I'd pretty much been on my own since I was 15, friends hadn't been a big part of my life either, at least until I'd met Morgan. The way Morgan's younger brothers looked up to me made me kind of feel like a big brother. I looked at Morgan for her approval. Do you mind if I hang with them for a little while? She smiled like she thought it was a wonderful idea. No, go ahead. I'll be inside. I watched her walk up the porch steps and into the house. Then I turned my attention to Zach and Brandon. Okay, guys, let's do this. My experience with playing soccer was limited, but I knew enough to have a good time with Morgan's brothers. Despite my inexperience, they seemed to be having fun, and as we played for the next half hour, I realized that as much as I loved being with Morgan's family, those feelings only fueled my desire to have a family of my own. I wanted to see my parents from this world sooner rather than later, like maybe that weekend. My decision made, I was eager to tell Morgan what I wanted to do. Hey guys, I said as I kicked the ball toward them. I'm going to go inside now, okay? Do you have to? Brandon said. I laughed. Yes, but thanks for letting me play with you. You can anytime you want, Zach said in a serious tone of voice, as if he feared I wouldn't know that. Cool. I went into the house. Morgan was reading on the couch. She looked up at me with a smile. Did they wear you out? I laughed. Pretty much, yeah. I sat next to her. Can I talk to you? She set her book down. Of course. Excited about my plans, I grinned. I'm ready to see my parents. Her eyes widened. Really? From a distance, I quickly added. Oh, well, yeah. She hesitated. I need to tell you something. What? A light flush crept up her cheeks. I told my mom. What? I thought. My heart pounded. What would her parents think if they knew about my crazy idea? You told her what exactly? She sighed. Last night she asked me about the slogan. You know, did I really think it up? So I told her it was from the pledge in the other world, and she said that's what she thought. A smile curved her lips. That means she believes us, Billy. Her optimism was contagious. Good. That's why I decided to tell her about your idea to find out if your parents here are different from your parents there. I hesitated, almost afraid to ask my question. What did she say? Her smile grew brighter. She said when you're ready to go, she'll drive us, maybe. I laughed. Maybe? What does that mean? Her smile dimmed. She's not sure that it's a great idea because, you know, they recently lost their son and all. Though I felt just as torn as Morgan's mother, I really, really wanted a family. Until I'd spent time with Morgan's family, I'd never realized what I'd been missing, and now I wanted it for myself. My respect for Morgan's parents was growing, and I valued their opinion. What does your mom think I should do? Morgan shrugged. I didn't ask her that. Continuously wondering what Billy Foster's parents in this world were like was starting to eat me up. I wanted to move forward on learning more about them. I want to go on Saturday, I said. Will you ask her if she'll drive me? Us, she said. You mean drive us? I smiled. Yes, us. I really don't want to go without you. You'd better not. What about your dad? Did your mom tell him about it? Morgan bit her lip. I don't know. I didn't tell her not to. Is it okay if she tells him? Steve Campbell had doubted our story when we told it to him on the night I'd arrived. What would he think about what I wanted to do? But I couldn't expect Morgan's mom to do something like this without telling him. If she's going to spend half the day helping us, I said, then I can't object to her telling him. Okay, good, she said. How do we even know if your parents will be at their house on Saturday? And then how are you going to see what they're like? The obstacles she was throwing up made me uncomfortable, but they were valid concerns. I have no idea, I said. Can we just go and then see what happens? It's an hour drive, each way. Don't you think we should have a plan before we ask my mom to take us there? Suddenly, I didn't want her mom involved. Can't we just take the bus or something? I asked. Then we won't have to inconvenience your mom. Morgan was quiet, like she was thinking it over. I guess, but I still want to tell her what we're doing. I'm okay with that. As a possibility of this happening came closer to becoming a reality, my anxiety notched up. What time do you want to go? Let's check the bus schedule, and then we can decide. I went with Morgan to the computer and watched as she pulled up the bus schedule. Looks like we can leave as early as 7, I said. But that might be a little too early. I mean, they probably won't be up yet. Morgan turned to me in her chair. If you're serious about doing this, then we need to put together a disguise. I imagined the looks on the faces of this world's parents if they were to recognize me. Shock, joy, disbelief, confusion. As much as I hated my parents from my world, I didn't want to put these unknown people through that. Okay, I said. After school tomorrow, we'll go shopping. Chapter 20. Morgan. The moment Billy and I dropped our backpacks off at Tasco's house the next afternoon, we began walking the 2 miles to the nearest shopping center. I hadn't told Mom our plans yet. I wanted to make sure Billy was still planning on going through with it, but I knew I would need to tell her tonight. I hope they have something that will work, I said, as Billy and I walked hand in hand. I'm sure we can come up with something. Half an hour later, we walked across the shopping mall parking lot and went into a drugstore. Let's see if they have any wigs, I suggested. It didn't take long to find the clearance shelf of leftover Halloween wigs. I dug through the pile and came up with one that could work. What do you think? I held up a dark brown wig with shoulder-length hair. Billy looked doubtful. Isn't that a woman's wig? I laughed. We can cut the hair, but the point is, it could work. Yeah, I guess. I tucked it under my arm and dragged him to the cosmetics section. You're not planning on dressing me up as a woman, are you? He asked. As the possibilities of that suggestion filled my mind, my eyes widened. You're brilliant! Of course that's what we should do! He laughed. I was joking, Morgan. I really don't want to dress up as a woman. I grabbed his arm. Don't you see? That could totally work. If you look like a girl, we could pretend like we're friends of Billy's and then ask if we could come in and talk to them about him. They won't suspect it's you if you're dressed like a girl. Billy shook his head. Talking to them about this world's version of me, a dead kid? That's too creepy. I don't think I can do that. I put my hands on my hips. Okay then, what do you think we should do? He stared at the rack of eye makeup, then he turned to me. What if we pretend we're selling something, just to get a close look at them? He paused, like he was deciding if he really wanted to say the next part. Then he sighed. I guess I can dress like a... His voice dropped to barely a whisper. A girl. I smiled. Really? Only because I don't know how else we can talk to them without drawing their suspicion. I turned to look at the makeup selection, then swiveled back to him. This is so going to work. Then I took a closer look at his face. I'll just have to shape your eyebrows a little. No self-respecting girl would have such bushy eyebrows. He threw his hands up like he was warding off an evil spell. Hold on, Morgan. I don't want to actually look like a girl. You're talking about making a permanent change. I laughed. Oh, believe me, those eyebrows will grow back. I have to pluck mine every day. Disbelief and uncertainty washed across his face. We need to come up with another idea. Staring at him with a look of challenge, I said, Like you said, how else are we going to get close to them without drawing their suspicion? His shoulders slumped. Maybe we should just forget this whole thing. I knew he didn't mean it. It's up to you, Billy. He scratched at his cheek as he stared at the makeup. Then he turned to me. For now, I just want to check out their house. Just walk by, but don't go to the door. What are you going to wear? He was quiet for a minute. I'll wear my hoodie and pull that up over my head. Understanding his hesitation, I didn't argue. Okay, whatever you want to do. A few minutes later, we were on our way back to Tasco's house. I want to look at that obituary again, Billy said as he unlocked the front door. I don't think Tasco will mind us going into his office if I'm looking up something specific. I followed Billy to Tasco's office, which really wasn't very interesting, and Billy turned on the computer. We waited while it booted up, then stared at the field where a password needed to be entered. Did he give you the password? I asked. No. I guess he only trusts you so much. He frowned at the computer screen. Yeah, I guess so. We can go to my house and look it up there. Yeah, sure. When we reached my house, we went inside and went straight to the computer. Looks like the kids are all busy, I said as I glanced around. It wouldn't do to have them see an obituary for Billy. He slid into the chair in front of the computer, and before long, we had the obituary up on the screen. I want to print it out, Billy said. The printer's hooked up, so go ahead. The printer spit out the page, and Billy closed the website, then folded the sheet of paper and tucked it into his pocket. He stood. Guess I'm ready. I nodded. What time do you want to go? I want to check one other thing. He spoke as if he didn't hear my question, then he sat down again. I watched as he pulled up a map program. What are you doing? I want to see where the cemetery is in relation to their house. He glanced at me over his shoulder. Maybe we can stop by it after we check out their house. Won't that be weird? Yeah, but this whole thing is pretty weird. I laughed. I can't argue with that. He studied the path from his parents' house to the cemetery. It's just a few miles from their house. He logged off the computer and turned to me. You were asking what time we should leave? Yeah. How about I get to your house about 8 tomorrow? Then we can walk to the bus stop. Okay. He laughed. At least we won't have to worry about hiding from enforcers. I thought about the night we'd escaped from Camp Willowmoss and the treacherous race away from that prison. We hadn't known where to go for safety. All I had known was that I had to get to the tunnel and at least try to get back to my world. I'd failed, but Billy hadn't abandoned me, and I wouldn't abandon him in his quest to have a family. Right, I said. The only thing we have to worry about is tired feet. After Billy left for Tasco's house, I helped Mom make dinner, worried about what she would say when she learned of our plans. It wasn't until the dinner dishes were washed that I got up the nerve to tell her, "Mom, can I talk to you for a minute?" She smiled. "Sure." Dad was trying to get the boys involved in a game at the kitchen table, and Amy was reading on the couch. "Can we go into my room?" Mom followed me upstairs, and I sat on my bed. She sat next to me and looked at me expectantly. "What's up?" Not sure how to begin, I dove in. "So, you know how I told you that Billy wants to see what his parents were like?" Tilting her head, she said, "Yeah? That is, Billy and I, are going tomorrow." She straightened and her eyebrows rose. "Going where exactly?" "We just want to see what their house looks like. We're not going up to the door or anything." She was quiet for a moment. "How are you going to get there?" "We're taking the bus." "Wouldn't you prefer for me to drive you?" I hesitated. "Have you told Dad about this?" Lips pursed, she stared at me. "I haven't had a chance to, but you know I'm not going to keep any secrets from him." "I know. I was just wondering." I paused, and my voice became quieter. "I'm just not sure he believes us." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Regardless, Morgan, I'll be telling him eventually." "I know, Mom. Billy and I can get there by ourselves, though, so you don't need to tell him anything yet." "What does that have to do with anything?" she asked. "I guess I thought if you didn't have to take us, then you wouldn't have to tell him yet." "I see. So is it okay if I go?" She frowned. "I'm glad you're telling me, but you know I'm not thrilled about you guys going." She sighed. "I understand why Billy wants to, though." She paused, like she was thinking over whether or not to allow me to go. "How are you going to keep his parents from seeing him?" "Well, we were going to put together kind of a disguise, but now he's just going to wear a hoodie and put it on over his head." "Uh-huh." She was clearly unimpressed. "Don't you think that will work?" "If all you're doing is walking past the house, I guess it will be okay." Frustrated, I said, "Maybe you should drive us." "I'm sorry, Morgan, but between your two brothers, both your dad and I will be busy tomorrow taking them to soccer games, and then Zach has a birthday party to go to." She smiled. "Maybe if you postpone this trip?" Billy was ready to go and wouldn't want to wait. "Billy wants to go tomorrow morning, and I'm not going to let him go by himself." Warmth toward my best friend swept over me. "Especially after all he's done for me. I can't let him do this by himself." Mom put her hand on my arm. "I know, Morgan." Chapter 21. Billy. Nervous for the trip Morgan and I were taking, I woke early on Saturday, but forced myself to stay in bed until 6:30. I imagined different scenarios: the dad catching me walking past his house and calling the police, the mom throwing her arms around me with joy, both of them yelling obscenities at me for daring to impersonate their son. When I couldn't wait any longer, I rolled out of bed and showered, then went down to the kitchen to have breakfast, even though I wasn't hungry. I forced myself to eat, since Morgan and I would be doing a lot of walking. I wanted to make sure I had plenty of fuel to keep myself going. "Morning," Tasco said, as he wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas. "I didn't know you were such an early riser, Billy." Sleeping in had never been something I'd had the luxury to do, so I didn't really know if I could do it. "Yeah," I said. "I guess I am." "What do you have planned today?" he asked. Then he smiled. "By the way, I'm going to get that part for the lawnmower so you can finish fixing it." "Okay," I said. "I'll work on it later, but Morgan and I are hanging out for a while today first." His smile grew. "She's a cute girl. I can see why you like to hang out with her." He had that right, but I wasn't about to discuss my feelings for Morgan with him. "Yeah." He poured himself some coffee. "I'll be in my office if you need anything." I nodded and took another bite of cereal. Then after I'd finished eating and had cleaned up my breakfast dishes, I headed to Morgan's house. As I waited for someone to answer my knock, I wondered what, if anything, she told her parents about our plans. I knew she couldn't just leave for hours without telling them something. "Hey, Billy," she said as she held the door open for me. "Hey." I walked inside and she closed the door. "Are you hungry? My dad's making pancakes." I hadn't been hungry when I'd eaten the cereal, and now that we were getting closer to being on our way, the thought of food made me nauseous. "No thanks, but go ahead." She grabbed me by the hand. "Come sit with me at least." "I can wait in the living room." "No, come on." I let her drag me into the kitchen, where her entire family sat around the table, except her dad, who stood in front of the stove. "Good morning, Billy." Her dad expertly flipped the row of pancakes cooking on the griddle. "Hi," I said. "You're here bright and early," he said. "What do the two of you have planned today?" I looked at Morgan. Hadn't she already told them something? "We haven't decided yet," she said. Then she glanced at her mom. What the heck? I thought we were about ready to walk out the door, but I didn't say anything. These were her parents, so I had to assume she knew how to handle them. "Have a seat, Billy," her dad said. "I make the world's best pancakes." "I've already eaten," I said, "but thank you." "They're really good," Brandon said, as if his dad's claim was in question. I smiled at him, noticing he wore a soccer uniform. "I'm sure they are," I said. I sat in an empty chair. "Looks like you're going to play soccer. Isn't it a little cold to play outside?" "We play indoors," Zach said. "Yeah," Brandon added. "And then when it warms up, we get to play outside." "They have to leave in just a little while," Morgan said. When I caught her eye, I thought I understood her plan. Wait until her parents left, and then we'd go. I nodded, and she smiled. 20 minutes later, Morgan's dad and Brandon left. The moment they were gone, Morgan spoke quietly to her mother, then walked over to me and smiled. "Ready to go?" At the realization that we were really going to do this, my heart began to pound. Yeah, sure." She picked up a backpack. "Okay, let's go." We walked out the front door and toward the street. "Did you tell your mom where we're going?" She smiled. "Yeah." "And she didn't object?" "No, because I told her we were only going to walk past their house and not go to the door." "Right." A few minutes later, we reached the bus stop, and after a short wait, it arrived. Once we reached town, we changed buses for the longer ride, and as we headed toward the town where my parents lived, I clutched Morgan's hand, my nerves stretched tight. "What do you think they would do if they saw me?" I asked. Her grasp on my hand tightened. "I think they'd be too shocked to do anything." I looked out the window at the passing scenery. "Yeah, I guess." When we reached our stop, we climbed off and started walking. "How far is it?" Morgan asked. "A couple of miles." We walked in silence for most of the way, and when we reached their street, I made sure my hoodie was pulled forward enough on my head to hide my face. "What's the address?" Morgan asked. I told her from memory, then glanced at the number on the house we were passing. My eyes went to a one-story blue house with white trim that was several houses away, but across the street. "I think we're almost there," I said. My eyes stayed locked on the blue house. "Is this a different house than the one you lived in? You know, in your world?" "Yeah, just like your family lived in a different house than they live in here." We continued in silence. "That's it," I murmured as we got close enough to the blue house to see the numbers affixed above the garage door. "All the curtains are closed," Morgan said, "and I don't see anyone around." Disappointment swept over me, although I don't know what I'd been expecting. At this time of year, most people stayed indoors. At least I could stare at their house without fear of being seen. The grass was mostly green, though beginning to go dormant for the winter. A large tree stood in the middle of the yard, though all the leaves had long since fallen to the ground. In fact, leaves were scattered throughout the yard, obviously in need of being cleaned up. An empty flower bed lined the space between the grass and the porch. A white Toyota Corolla was parked in the driveway, and I wondered if another car was parked in the garage, or if that was their only car. My parents had only been able to afford one car, but maybe the financial circumstances of these people were different. We stayed across the street as we passed the house, slowing our pace so I could get a good look. I wondered what they were doing in there, and for a moment I was tempted to knock on the front door and reveal myself. Then I pictured them calling the police to have me arrested, and I felt myself pulling inward, especially when the memory of my parents bringing me to a fat center so they could get the reward money flashed in my head. "Are you okay?" Morgan asked. "No, not really," I said, because I knew I could be honest with her. When we were 30 feet past their house, I stopped and turned to take one long last look at the house where my parents in this world lived, and in my heart I said goodbye, because I didn't think I would have the courage to ever come back there again. Chapter 22. Billy. Once we left my parents' street, it was as if a weight had been removed from my shoulders. I'd wanted to see where they lived, and now I had. Almost giddy, I visualized the directions to the cemetery. Then I said to Morgan, "Are you ready for another long walk?" She laughed. "If Mr. Muscles could see me now." I laughed with her as I thought about the man who ran the gym at Camp Willowmoss. "That guy was such a jerk," I said. "Yeah, I'm glad I don't have to see him again." "No kidding." "Do you want some water?" she asked as she pulled the backpack off of her shoulders. "Sure." We each took a bottle, then I put the backpack on my shoulders before we continued on. 40 minutes later, the cemetery came into view. "There it is," I said. I didn't see anyone around as we walked through the open gates. "How are we going to find where he's buried?" The whole concept of finding this world's version of me was surreal. "I don't know." Morgan looked at me. "Why are we here again?" I chuckled. "Really, I have no idea, but think about it. If the other Morgan was buried here, wouldn't you be curious to see her headstone?" She was quiet. "Yeah, I guess so, but that would be so weird." "Yeah, now you know how I feel." "Okay, yeah, I get it." We walked along the road that ran through the cemetery. "Do you think anyone's around who can show us where he's buried?" She looked around. "I don't see anyone." "Let's check out that building." I pointed to a small structure a short distance away. When we reached the building, we found a doorway, and inside was a map of the cemetery, along with a listing of people who were buried there. "Here we go," I said, as I began thumbing through the pages. It didn't take long to find out where Billy Foster was buried. I looked at the map, then figured out where we needed to go. "I'm not even going to bother trying to figure it out," Morgan said with a smile. "Not with my sense of direction." Her non-existent sense of direction had ended up being a good thing, as it had kept her from divulging exactly where Jack's house was. "Yeah," I said with a laugh, "I'll be in charge of directions." "Fine with me." Once we had the right location, it didn't take long to find Billy's burial plot. I frowned as I stared at my name and birth date engraved on the gray stone. Birds softly chirped. I found the sound comforting. If I'd stayed in my world, I thought, would I be dead now? Did coming to this world change the path I was on? I'd like to think I was where I was supposed to be, but I had no way of knowing if that was true. Morgan's fingers found mine, and I knew at least she was real. She was next to me. She was there for me. Maybe that was all I needed to know, at least for now. The sound of a car's engine broke the silence, and I looked toward the entrance to the cemetery. A white Toyota Corolla was driving through the gate, a car that looked just like the one that had been parked in my parents' driveway. "Come on," I said to Morgan as I tugged her in the opposite direction from where the car would most likely go. "What is it?" she asked. Then she followed my gaze and her eyes widened. "Are those Billy's parents?" "I think so." We hurried to a headstone quite a distance from Billy's. "Pull on your hoodie." "Oh yeah, thanks." I tugged the hood over my head, pulling it forward to hide my face. We stopped next to a tall headstone that nearly hid us from view and watched as my parents parked their car along the road near Billy's gravesite. A man who looked just like my dad climbed out of the driver's side. My attention was riveted to him, and as I watched him, hatred poured through me. I heard his voice in my head demanding the reward money and remembered how helpless I'd felt, flat on my back, paralyzed by the effects of the taser. He walked around the car and opened the passenger door. A woman who looked just like my mother climbed out, a bouquet of flowers in her hand. The man put his arm around her shoulder, and together they walked toward Billy's grave. From where I stood, I had a clear view of their faces. I couldn't miss the woman's shaking shoulders as she sobbed, or the stream of tears that coursed down her face. Everything around me faded to nothingness as I watched this couple who seemed so saddened by the loss of their son. Even the man's face was contorted with grief as they reached the headstone. The woman set the bouquet of flowers on the ground in front of the headstone, then fell to her knees. Her whole body shook as she was overcome with sobs, and the man knelt beside her and pulled her against him. They stayed like that for several minutes until the woman reached out and placed her hand against the headstone. Her husband helped her to her feet, and they made their way back to the car where he held the door open for her. A few moments later, they drove off. I blinked, and the sound of birds once again filled my ears. My face felt cold, and I realized it was damp with tears. Quickly wiping them away, I cleared my throat, then began walking back to Billy's grave. I heard the soft sound of Morgan's footsteps as she followed me across the grass. The stark contrast between these people and the people I'd known in my world staggered me. My parents in my world, after kicking me out, had taken the time to track me down when I'd become a wanted person, and then had delivered me to the authorities so that they could receive the reward money. The people in this world seemed genuinely devastated by the loss of their child. With the display of emotion I'd witnessed, I couldn't imagine them kicking their child out because they didn't want to have to take care of him, and then basically selling their child to the authorities. That didn't match with the unmistakable sorrow I'd seen, and it certainly hadn't been for show. I didn't think they'd noticed Morgan and me, let alone known that a new Billy stood nearby watching them. I stopped in front of the grave and knelt on the grass, then reached out and touched the beautiful flowers that the mother had so tenderly set on the ground. I could feel Morgan standing beside me, but I focused on the emotions racing through me. Maybe these people were different. They'd certainly shown feelings I'd never seen my own parents show. Even so, I couldn't imagine appearing on their doorstep, their deceased son now living and breathing, expecting to be welcomed with open arms. That didn't seem right either. I slowly stood, my heart heavy with the realization that reuniting with this world's version of my parents was not something that could happen. The thought made me exceedingly forlorn. It was clear that they loved their son, something I would never have the chance to experience. Still, I was glad I'd come, glad I'd seen how they felt about their son. Once more, the feeling that I didn't belong in this world grew within me, and I doubted my decision to follow Morgan back to her world. A gentle touch on my shoulder pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned to Morgan with a sad smile. "Are you okay?" she asked. I gazed at her, envious that she was where she belonged, and that she had a family who not only loved her, but knew she existed. Her mother even believed our story. "Yeah," I finally said, though I knew it would take me some time to come to grips with my reality. "What do you want to do now?" "I guess go back to Fox Run?" She nodded. "Okay." Lost in our own thoughts, we walked to the bus stop in relative silence. On the ride back, I felt less melancholy, and by the time we got to Morgan's house, I felt a lot better. "Do you want to go with me to Tasco's?" I asked as we went into her house. He was going to get the parts for the lawnmower. "Sure, I just need to check in." Chapter 23. Morgan. "Mom?" I called out as Billy and I walked into the living room. "In here!" Her voice came from the kitchen. We walked into the bright and sunny room where Mom was spreading peanut butter onto apple slices. I could see Dad playing out back with my brothers. My eyes went to the food Mom was preparing, and my stomach rumbled. I turned to Billy. "Are you hungry?" He smiled, and the sadness that I'd seen on his face all morning seemed to be lifting. "Yeah." I felt so bad for him as we'd walked back to the bus stop. It had been hard on him to see the way his parents had been so devastated by the loss of their son, because there was nothing he could do about it. My heart ached to know that he might never have a family like I did, and I wanted to tell him that he was now part of my family, but I wasn't sure he was ready to hear that. "How'd it go?" Mom asked, as she set the sliced apples on plates, her eyes briefly meeting mine before going to Billy's face. Wanting to give Billy the chance to say what was on his mind, I didn't reply. "We saw them," he said. Mom's eyebrows rose. "Did they see you?" "No," Billy said. "It was at the cemetery, and we weren't close enough for them to see us." "The cemetery?" Mom said. "What were you doing there?" "Just checking things out," he said. "We had no idea that they would show up." I walked to the counter and began making sandwiches for Billy and me. "How did the boys' games go?" I asked. I had the feeling that Billy would rather not talk about our morning. "Great," Mom said. "They both won their games." She poured cups of juice. "I need to take Zach to a birthday party in a little while." She turned to me with a smile. "What about you? What are you doing this afternoon?" "Billy promised to fix Mr. Tasco's lawnmower," I said, "so we're going to head over there." "Okay." Billy didn't mention the trip to see his parents after that, and I didn't bring it up either. It was his business, and not something I was going to push him on. Evidently, Mom hadn't yet told Dad, and now that the visit was over and done with, it didn't seem important to tell him. The next week was uneventful. Billy and I worked on our homework together every day, and he seemed to be settling into the routine of this world. On Friday afternoon, as Billy and I reached my house, I saw a car parked out front that I hadn't seen before. "I wonder who's here," I said. Billy shrugged. We walked through the gate, and Goldie bounded toward us. After stopping to pet her, we walked to the porch, and I opened the front door. My focus went to the people sitting in my living room, and when I saw Holly Bennett chatting with Amy, my heart nearly stopped beating. "What is she doing here?" I thought. "How did she find me?" Panic, thick and pure, infused every nerve in my body, and it was all I could do not to bolt out the front door. But, certain that Holly was there to drag Amy to Camp Stonewater in my place, I forced myself to stay. I had to stop her. I couldn't let her take my baby sister, not after all that Amy had already been through. Trembling with fear and indignation, I blurted, "You can't take her!" Everyone turned to look at me with furrowed brows and questioning eyes. "Morgan," Billy murmured in warning, then he put his hand in mine. I turned to him, positive my face showed stark terror, but his expression was so calm, so reassuring, that my terror slowly seeped away. I blinked several times, coming back to the here and now. "Everything's okay," he whispered next to my ear. Nodding with the realization that I'd overreacted, I turned to the group assembled in the living room, a group that consisted of Mom, Amy, Holly, and a man I didn't recognize. "Sorry," I said with a self-conscious laugh. I didn't offer an explanation for my bizarre outburst. "Morgan," Mom said, with a look that was a mix of understanding and embarrassment, "this is Mrs. Bennett. She's here with some news." "Call me Holly," Holly said as she stood and held out her hand. "You must be Amy's sister." I stared at her hand, the hand that had pressed the button on the torture device, sending me into throes of agony when I wouldn't tell her where Jack lived. Billy gently squeezed my left hand, and I forced myself to put my right hand into Holly's. "Yes," I said, my voice scratchy, then I cleared my throat. "I'm Morgan." Holly released my hand, then recognition came into her eyes. "Morgan, yes. I think I remember you from the assembly at Fox Run High." A blush rose on my cheeks. I felt uncomfortable to be facing the woman I feared, the woman I'd also confronted in front of my entire school. I didn't reply to her unasked question. "You seem to feel rather passionate about your point of view." She smiled, like we were all friends here, but I only felt antipathy toward her. I stared at her, then lifted my lips in a slight smile. "Why are you here? What's going on?" She smiled at Amy, then turned back to me. Your sister won the slogan contest. Oh no, I thought. I smiled at Amy. That's great, Amy. Congratulations. Her face reddened, and she looked at her lap. It's only thanks to you. What? Holly said, as she looked between Amy and me. It was Morgan's idea, Amy said, looking at Holly. Is that right? Holly said, as she sat next to Amy on the couch. Then she turned to me. You came up with a healthy me is a healthy world, Morgan? I didn't, of course. I had no idea who had come up with it, and I didn't want to take credit for a phrase that had become the bane of my existence. Yes, Amy said with a smile, filling in the silence. It was Morgan's idea. Denying it would bring up questions that I couldn't answer, so I didn't say anything at all. I think that's terrific, Holly said. Don't you think that's terrific, Matt? She said to the man sitting on the chair adjacent to the couch. He smiled. Yes. Sisters working together, Holly said. I like it. I didn't understand why she was making such a big deal about it. I told Amy I didn't care about the contest. Truth be told, I wanted nothing to do with it. Mrs. Campbell, Holly said to Mom, with your permission, I'd like to use both of your daughters in our local PSA spot. Her use of the word use didn't go unnoticed by me. Of course they would want to use us for their own purposes. What's a PSA spot? Amy asked. Holly turned to her with a smile. It's a public service announcement. It's the way the government gets its messages out. Also known as propaganda, I thought. Oh, Amy said. I'll need to talk to my husband, Mom said, as she glanced at me before looking at Holly. Of course, Holly said. I understand. Not every winning slogan gets the opportunity to do one, but we particularly liked Amy's, so we've selected hers to be the main PSA in your area until we choose a state and then a national winner. Holly turned to Amy. Now that you've won the local contest, your slogan will go up against others in your state, and the winner of your state will go up against all the other state winners until we come up with a national slogan. My stomach churned. I had no doubt Amy's slogan would win the national contest. Amy smiled, obviously thrilled to be the winner. Now, Holly went on, you'll be presented with the iPad at an assembly at your school on Monday. What about Morgan? Amy asked. Does she get one too? I shook my head, but before I could speak, Holly said, I'm afraid you'll have to share with your sister. That's okay, Amy said. I smiled at my sweet sister, who was so willing to share the spotlight, as well as her prize, even though I didn't want either. Well, Holly said as she stood, I'll let you get on with your day. The man, Matt, stood as well. Again, Amy, Holly said, congratulations. Then she turned to me. And to you as well, Morgan. That was a very clever slogan. Her forehead creased in question. Tell me, what made you think of it? I'm curious, especially in light of your impassioned comments at the assembly. My gaze shifted to Mom, who knew the truth, then back to Holly. I shrugged. It just came to mind, which was completely true. I'm glad it did, she said. I wasn't, but I pushed a fake smile onto my face nevertheless. Mom walked Holly and Matt to the door, and a moment later they were gone. I can't believe I won, Amy said as she jumped up from the couch and rushed over to me before throwing her arms around me. Thank you, Morgan. I hugged her back. I'm going to call Cassie, she said, before bounding off toward the kitchen, leaving just Mom, me, and Billy. There's no way I'm going to be in any PSA of hers, I said to Mom. That's fine, Mom said. You don't have to be. She smiled, then left Billy and me alone. I turned to Billy with a frown. I hate that they're going to use that slogan. Not much we can do about it. That night at dinner, after Billy had gone to Tasco's, Amy excitedly told Dad about winning the contest. That's fantastic, Amy, he said. I told Holly that Morgan thought of it, Amy said, and now she wants both of us to be in her commercial. Clearly, Amy thought that was the coolest thing ever. Really? Dad said. Then he looked at Mom. Yes, Mom said. She glanced at me before turning to Dad. "They'll need our permission, though." "I think it's great," Dad said. "I'm not going to do it," I murmured. "What?" Amy said, her expression showing how shocking that was. "Why not? Don't you want to be on TV?" "That would be so cool," Zach said. "I want to be on TV," Brandon added. I'd had enough publicity to last a lifetime, just not in this world. I smiled at Amy. "You should just do it. You're the one who made the poster, and you're the one who entered the contest." Amy half shrugged, like that was true enough. "Okay." "All right then," Dad said. "It's decided. Amy's in and Morgan declined." Mom smiled. "I'll let Holly know." I hated that Mom said that woman's name so casually, like she was a friend of the family. Maybe I needed to let Mom know that Holly was the one who had tortured me. But then I decided that wouldn't be helpful. Chapter 24. Morgan. Over the weekend, Billy and I hung out. Tasco's kids were visiting that weekend, and Billy wasn't particularly interested in getting to know them. We avoided talking about hot-button issues, like his parents or Amy winning the slogan contest, and just enjoyed spending time together. The next week would be Thanksgiving, and we only had 2 days of school before the break. But when I got home from school on Monday without Billy, Tasco had some jobs he wanted Billy to do around his house. Amy was moping around, obviously upset about something. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Didn't you get your iPad today?" "Yes," she said with a small smile. "Then what is it?" "I can't be on TV." Her smile turned into a frown. Though it wasn't important to me, I knew it was extremely important to Amy, and before I even knew the reason, I blamed Holly. "Why not, Amy?" She frowned. "Holly said it has to be both of us or I can't do it." I knew it was because of her, I thought. My hatred for the woman went up another notch. "That's dumb." "I know," she said. Pleading filled her eyes. "Please do it, Morgan. Please." I was so against everything Holly's Healthy Lifestyles organization stood for. How could I possibly advocate for them in a public service announcement? I would look like a hypocrite. I would be a hypocrite. But when I looked at my sister's face, I found it exceedingly difficult to tell her no, especially after she'd so selflessly told Holly that she hadn't even come up with a slogan. For all Amy had known, admitting that to Holly could have completely stripped her of winning. But she hadn't hesitated. Just like she hadn't hesitated to fling herself at me when I'd been outed as Morgan Campbell during the lie detector test at Camp Willowmoss. She'd only thought of me. My heart pounded, and I briefly closed my eyes before meeting her beseeching gaze. "Okay, Amy, I'll do it." "Yay!" she shouted, before wrapping her arms around me. "Thank you, thank you, thank you!" "What's going on?" Mom asked as she came into the room. Amy released me and turned to Mom. "She said yes!" Pure joy filled her voice. "She said she would do the commercial." "Oh?" Mom's eyes went to me. "Holly won't let her do it alone," I said. Mom nodded. "That's right. That's what she told me. She wants to show that you and Amy are united on this idea of being healthy." I didn't understand why that mattered, but it was so important to Amy that I couldn't deny her. "I'll give Holly a call," Mom said. A short time later, Mom came back to announce that Holly wanted to start shooting the PSA on the Saturday after the Thanksgiving weekend. "They want to have it ready to broadcast by the 1st of the year." Amy squealed, "I'm going to be on TV! I'm so excited! I've got to call Cassie." I couldn't hold back a smile as I watched Amy scamper off. "Are you sure about this, Morgan?" Mom asked. "Not really," I admitted. "But it looks like I'm committed now." Mom smiled. "Yes, it does." For Thanksgiving, Mom invited Billy and Tasco for dinner, and they both came. Tasco's kids were with their mother for Thanksgiving this year, so he didn't have anyone to spend the day with. He and Billy seemed to be getting along really well. It made me rethink my opinion of Tasco. Even though I didn't know if I could ever forget my experience with the other world's Richard Tasco, it was good to see that this world's Tasco was completely different from what I'd expected when I'd first seen him walk into our living room. "We start doing that commercial a week from Saturday," Amy told Billy, as the three of us cleaned up from our feast. "That's cool," he said. "What are they going to have you do?" "I don't know," she said as she loaded the dishwasher. He smiled. "It'll probably be a lot of fun." I wasn't so sure about that, but I kept my thoughts to myself. When the Saturday of the PSA arrived, Mom drove Amy and me to a local television studio where the PSA would be filmed. "Good morning," Holly said with enthusiasm as she met us inside. "Hi," Amy said as she bounced on the balls of her feet. My smile was tight. "Hello." "We'll begin as soon as we do hair and makeup," Holly announced. Amy was all in, and for her sake, I forced myself to go along. Holly herded us over to a brightly lit area where we sat in chairs that faced a pair of mirrors. Mom stood nearby, keeping an eye on everything. "Okay, girls," Holly said as she held out a sheet of paper to each of us. "Here's what you'll say." As two women worked on our hair and makeup, we reviewed our lines, and I did my best not to wad up the sheet of paper and throw it at Holly, who was consulting with her sidekick, Matt, on the far side of the room. "This is so cool, Morgan," Amy said, her grin showing how thrilled she was to be treated like some sort of celebrity. Suppressing my desire to flee, I smiled and nodded. "Aren't you so excited?" Amy pressed. "Mm-hmm," I forced out. "I can't wait for my friends to see me on TV," she gushed. I couldn't wait for this to be over with. Once we were ready to begin, Holly showed us where to stand. "Okay," she said, her fake smile brighter than ever. "We'll hold up cue cards that will have your lines written on them, so just read what's on the cards when I tell you to." "I can totally do that," Amy said, the wattage of her smile outshining Holly's, but at least Amy's was genuine. We ran through the script several times before they began filming, and every time I said my lines, I had to force a smile. Finally, Holly said she thought we were as ready as we were going to be, and someone called action. I was the first to speak. "Who doesn't love to get a gift at the holidays, or any time?" I picked up a cheerfully wrapped package and held it out to Amy, who beamed with pure happiness as she accepted it, and I knew she wasn't acting. She was beyond ecstatic. I said, "We love to give gifts to our loved ones, but we need to give a very important gift to ourselves, the gift of good health." Amy said, "It's a new year, so it's time for a new attitude. Make the better choice and choose foods that will fuel our bodies." The next part was the most difficult for me to say, but I forced the words out of my mouth, reminding myself that I was only doing this for Amy. "The healthier we are," I said, "the healthier those around us will be." Thankfully, Amy was assigned the slogan, and she said it with gusto. "A healthy me is a healthy world." It took several hours and many takes, but eventually we finished. I half hoped that Holly would say we were terrible and that they wouldn't be able to use it, but my wish was not to be. "Wonderful job, girls," she said. "I'm so excited to get this live." "Me too," Amy said. I tried to hide my excitement, which was easy since it was non-existent. "At the first of the year," Holly said, "we'll hold a special assembly at your schools to introduce the new slogan. This PSA will be the centerpiece." Her smile grew. "Congratulations!" On the drive home, I was quiet, but no one seemed to notice since Amy chatted with exuberance about our day. Her delight in our experience more than made up for my glumness. Chapter 25. Billy. "How'd it go?" I asked Morgan when she arrived at my house on the afternoon she filmed the PSA. I'd been at Tasco's house for nearly a month, and I was beginning to think of it as my house, too. She flopped onto the couch with a dramatic sigh. "Amy loved it." I laughed. "That's not a surprise. But what did you think about it? She sat up straighter and frowned at me. It was just like you would imagine a morning spent with Holly and her obsession with having a healthy lifestyle would be. She described the way the commercial went and recited the entire script. I stared at her. Are you so against having a healthy lifestyle? She stared back. Of course not, Billy. I'm just against the government forcing us to do it. Well, yeah, I know. I am too. But that PSA doesn't sound like it's forcing anyone to do anything. Her lips pressed into a straight line. Come on, Billy. You know it's only the beginning. She scowled. Why are you arguing for their side anyway? Wanting to lighten the mood, I laughed. I'm not. I'm just trying to understand why you seem so bothered by this commercial. I paused as I looked at her. It doesn't sound like it was too terrible. That's because we don't know where it's going to lead. For all we know, they'll use that to soften people up before they create more rules. Now that I'd left my world behind, I'd started to become pretty comfortable with the way things worked in this world, and I wondered if Morgan was overreacting. I was sure it had been quite a shock to come to my world after being used to such unquestioned freedom here, but that didn't mean this world was headed to the same place my world had ended up. Deciding it was best to move the conversation in another direction, I said, What do you want for Christmas, Morgan? It's only a few weeks away, you know. Her features smoothed out. I love Christmas. It's my favorite holiday. When I was a kid, I'd like Christmas just fine, but it had been a while since that holiday, or any holiday, had been fun for me. This year was going to be different, though. Now that I had Morgan and her family in my life, even Tasco, it had to be better than it had been in the past. As it turned out, Tasco had made plans to take his kids on a trip for Christmas, so Morgan's family invited me to spend a few days with them. On Christmas Eve, 8-year-old Brandon was quite concerned with the idea of me sleeping on the couch. What if Santa sees you and decides not to leave any presents? He asked. Trying to hold back a laugh, I told him, I'll hold really still and I'll make sure my eyes are closed. Then I know he'll leave presents. That seemed to mollify him. The next morning, Brandon shook me awake. He came, he said, his eyes shiny with excitement. Pretending not to know what he was talking about, I said, Who came? Santa! Santa came! Rubbing my eyes, I slowly sat up on the couch. Really? I didn't even hear him. Brandon's shoulders slumped. So you didn't see him? Nope. Sorry, dude. A short time later, the rest of the family came down to the living room, and after everyone opened their presents, we had a big breakfast. Warmth pulsed through me as I began to realize that Morgan's family had kind of become my adopted family. Chapter 26. Morgan. On the Friday after Christmas break, we were on an assembly schedule, but dread pounded inside me. This assembly would be the big reveal of the PSA Amy and I had done. Though Amy had told everyone she knew about it, the only person I told was Billy. I hadn't even told Rochelle. I don't know why. Maybe in the back of my mind I'd hoped it would just go away. At the end of health, Billy and I went with the rest of our class to the auditorium. This time, we were one of the first classes to arrive, so we sat near the front. A large white screen hung down, drawing everyone's attention. Billy sat next to me, and when I saw Mr. Cunningham walk onto the stage ready to begin, I gripped Billy's hand. I know you hate this, Billy murmured next to me, but you have to stay calm. I know, I said, but saying it wasn't the same as doing it, and I hoped I could fly under the radar. Good afternoon, Mr. Cunningham said. I trust all of you had a good holiday break. A bunch of kids cheered, and once they settled down, he went on. We have a return guest today, someone who is here for a special presentation. Then Mr. Cunningham looked right at me. I trust that you'll give her your full attention and be on your best behavior. I narrowed my eyes. Why did he feel the need to warn me? Was she going to do something I wasn't going to like? The thought made my head pound, and any calm I'd forced on myself fled. You may remember when Mrs. Bennett from the Healthy Lifestyles organization came to talk to us late last year, he said. Several kids booed at that, but they quieted when Mr. Cunningham glared at them. She told you about a contest, and today she has some exciting news. He paused and smiled. Please welcome Mrs. Holly Bennett. A smattering of applause greeted her as she took the mic from Mr. Cunningham. Good afternoon, students, she said, her white teeth shining in the lights. She wasn't looking at me, so I took the opportunity to study her. It was eerie to see her standing there under the bright lights when my memory of her alternate self was so fresh in my mind. The self who directed a pair of enforcers to hold me down, while a third person injected the torture device into the base of my skull. Her words on that day echoed in my mind. Remember, Morgan, you wanted this. A shudder raced through me, and Billy gently squeezed my hand. As Mr. Cunningham reminded you, Holly said, we held a contest to find the best slogan for our Healthy Lifestyles initiative. As many of you probably know, your very own Morgan Campbell's sister won this contest. Everyone's eyes shifted to me, and I worked to keep myself from sliding down in my seat. What most of you don't know, however, she went on, is that Morgan helped her sister come up with the winning slogan. Blood rushed to my face in mortification. I was the girl who'd protested what our organization wanted to do, yet I'd helped with a slogan? At least you didn't tell them that you actually came up with it, Billy whispered in my ear. I glanced at him and saw one side of his mouth quirk up. Then I faced Holly and hoped everyone else was looking at her now, too. We are pleased to announce Amy Campbell's winning slogan, Holly said. But I think it would be appropriate if Morgan told you exactly what it is. She looked right at me. Please come up on stage, Morgan. Oh, crap. I frantically looked for a way to escape. Go ahead, Billy said. Just get it over with. I turned to him. I don't want to do this. I know, but you don't have a choice. Choice, I thought. That's what this whole thing is about, and I was about to exercise mine. Come on, Morgan, Holly urged. Don't be shy. My eyes shifted to her, and I felt such loathing for this woman that I was certain it shone from my eyes like a beacon. When my eyes met hers, her smile faltered. I knew she could read the hatred on my face. That's okay, I said. My gaze flicked to Mr. Cunningham, who stood off to the side of the stage. I'm fine down here. My refusal obviously threw her because she seemed to struggle for a second to know what to say. Finally, she pushed her fake smile back onto her lips. All right, I suppose I'll tell you then. She gestured to the large screen hanging behind her, and Amy's poster appeared in full color. As you can see for yourself, the winning slogan is, A healthy me is a healthy world. Holly applauded, and a number of kids did as well, evidently following her lead. Yes, thank you. She paused as she waited for the applause to peter out. Now it's time to show you a brief commercial that Morgan and her sister made to go along with the winning slogan. I didn't make it, I wanted to shout. I just participated in this stupid thing. Holly made it sound like Amy and I put it together. Frowning, I waited while the lights were dimmed. Then I looked at the screen hanging in the center of the stage. The commercial was brief but effective, and I glanced at the faces of the kids around me. Some were actually nodding, like they agreed with the message. The lights came back on, and Holly took the stage. Wasn't that great? The applause was a little more enthusiastic this time. Yes, Holly said. Morgan and her sister did a terrific job. Another pause until the clapping stopped. This commercial is online now, and soon you'll see it on TV. She paused again, obviously trying to get everyone's attention. I have one other announcement today. What is it? Billy asked me. I didn't know about any other announcement that was tied to the PSA. I shrugged, but I had a bad feeling. As part of our Healthy Lifestyles initiative, Holly said, your school district has been selected to participate in an important pilot program. Beginning next week, All students will be required to stop by the nurse's office every 30 days to have their weight recorded. Chapter 27. Morgan. I gasped in shock. Weigh-ins? Here? In my world? The auditorium erupted in chatter, and Mr. Cunningham took the mic from Holly. "Settle down," he demanded. "Settle down." After several moments, everyone quieted, and he handed the mic back to Holly. "Thank you, Mr. Cunningham," she said with a smile, like the news she just delivered was a positive development. "I'm sure you're wondering why we want to gather this information. Well, that's just it. We're interested in looking for trends. We're not going to keep track of each person's individual weight, but rather we're going to combine the data for the purpose of seeing how effective our Healthy Lifestyles initiative is." "What if we don't want to do it?" a girl called out. Holly's smile never dimmed. "Participation is not optional." My body tensed as the urge to say something crept up my throat. My gaze shot to Mr. Cunningham, but he wasn't looking at me. He must have known about this announcement. That's why he looked directly at me when he warned us to be on our best behavior. "I'm not going to do it," another girl shouted from somewhere in the middle of the room. I was glad other people were speaking out. It made it less necessary for me to say anything. "Think about our new slogan," Holly said. "A healthy me is a healthy world." If we don't all work together, then our society will be headed down the wrong path. The path to obesity, the path to poor health, the path to shorter lifespans. She paused. Your leaders, the people we voted into office, they believe this new path is the best path for our country. One day, Holly continued, your generation will be in charge. And if you decide we should take another direction, you can change it. These weigh-ins will help us to help you. Where we find patterns of weight gain, we can adjust the food choices to accommodate that. Her smile grew. All of these changes are there to help you to have a healthier lifestyle. I squirmed in my seat as thoughts churned through my head. I had no interest in what our leaders thought was best for me, and I didn't want to wait years to make a difference. I wanted to be able to make my own decisions now. It seemed like lots of other kids felt the same way. I was on my feet before I'd made a conscious decision to stand, and since everyone else remained seated, all eyes went to me. "Morgan," Holly said as she zeroed in on me, her smile dimming several watts. "Did you have a comment?" I nodded, then dove in. "I think the weigh-ins are a mistake." Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement, and I shifted my gaze to Mr. Cunningham, who had taken a couple of steps toward Holly. When his eyes met mine, he shook his head, but I ignored him as I focused back on Holly. "Weigh-ins are just the first step," I said. "Next thing you know, we'll have to weigh ourselves at home so that the government can take note of," I held up my fingers to do air quotes, "weight gain patterns. And then what? Will the government adjust our meals at home too?" "Now, Morgan," Holly said, her face showing a battle between the fake smile and a deep frown. "You're getting way, way ahead of yourself. The government has no intention of doing any such thing." Her eyes locked on mine, and a shocking thought filled my mind. If she had access to the torture device, and if it was still in my neck, would she be pressing it about now? She laughed like I was being completely ridiculous. "Where do you come up with these things anyway?" She pursed her lips. "You have quite the imagination, don't you, Morgan?" As much as I wanted to scream that such a thing had actually happened, and that I'd lived it, I clenched my jaw to keep the words from flowing out of my mouth and into the open space of the auditorium where I wouldn't be able to take them back. "You said it yourself," Holly said, as she gestured to the screen where the PSA had been shown a short time before. "The healthier we are, the healthier those around us will be." With a furrowed brow, like she was completely confused, she shook her head. "Was that all a lie, Morgan? Did you not mean it?" Billy's hand slid into mine, and I glanced at him as he sat in his seat. Then I turned to Holly and glared at her. You know I only said it because it was on the cue cards. Her eyes widened, like her confusion had worsened. If you were so against this, Morgan, then why did you do the PSA in the first place? She chuckled. It makes you look kind of, how should I say this, hypocritical. There, she'd said it, in front of my whole school, and now everyone would think it. I did it for my sister, I said. You told my mother that you wouldn't let Amy be in your stupid commercial unless I did it too. That's the only reason I agreed to it. I heard gasps coming from the students around me at my obvious insubordination to an adult, but I tuned them out as I focused on the woman who seemed determined to turn my world into a place that would make everyone's lives miserable. She shook her head like what I'd said was completely false. But Morgan, that simply isn't true. Be honest now. You begged me to let you be in it. That was a complete and total lie. I couldn't believe we were having this argument in front of the whole school. What was her game? And was I playing right into it? It was time to put an end to this, especially with a murderous look on Mr. Cunningham's face. I revoke your permission to use me in your commercial, I called out. My agreement is with your parents, she said. You are a minor, which means you don't have the legal standing to change the contract that your parents signed with the HLO. She laughed softly as she looked around the room. But don't worry, you're getting the attention you so desperately seem to crave. I followed her gaze and saw that more than half the kids in the room had their phones out, filming the exchange. When I met the eyes of the boy filming me from the row right in front of mine, he smiled, but held his phone steady. Feeling defeated, and knowing I was going to be in deep trouble with Mr. Cunningham, I decided I'd said enough. I sat down. The boy in front of me turned back to the front, and I hoped everyone else was losing interest in me as well. Well then, Holly said, that was exciting, wasn't it? There are strong feelings on both sides of this issue. Your leaders feel very strongly that they need to do all they can to help you make healthy food choices. She glanced at me, then said, Despite what some say, I expect full cooperation from all of you in regards to the monthly weigh-ins that will begin next week. She smiled again. Thank you so much for letting me speak to you today. A few students clapped, then Mr. Cunningham dismissed us. My eyes met his, and he pointed to me, then pointed in the direction of his office. I got the message and turned to Billy. I'm going to talk to Mr. Cunningham. Billy looked at the stage where Mr. Cunningham was watching the students file out. Then he looked at me. I'll wait for you outside if you want. I smiled. Yes. Then he kissed me, right in front of anyone who was watching. Always remember, Morgan, I support you, no matter what. Thrilled beyond belief by his kiss as well as his words, my anxiety over meeting with the principal was replaced by happiness to have Billy on my side. Thanks. I'll be out front. I nodded, then watched him move to the aisle and merge with the other students. Chapter 28. Morgan. Shut the door, Mr. Cunningham said as I entered his office. I did. Then I sank into the chair across the desk from him. He stared at me. The last time we met, I gave you some instructions. What were they? Though he was obviously angry with me, it was nothing like the animosity I'd felt from Mrs. Reynolds, or Holly, or any of the other people I'd met in the other world who had seemed to enjoy making my life miserable. That fact calmed me. There was only so much he could do to me, and none of it was anywhere near as bad as what had been done to me in Billy's world. You told me to keep my mouth shut, I said. He frowned. Would you agree that you seem to have a hard time doing that, Morgan? Insulted by his obvious attitude that my opinion wasn't worth sharing, I said, I couldn't sit quietly in my seat when I heard what Holly and her organization have planned. It's bad enough that they're going to remove our food choices, but now the school is going to require us to get weighed? I stared at him, and even though I knew it probably seemed disrespectful, I said, Are you okay with these weigh-ins, Mr. Cunningham? He didn't seem to appreciate my attempt to get his honest opinion. We're not talking about me, Morgan. We're talking about your extreme rudeness to an invited guest." Not wanting to make my situation any worse, I didn't say anything. "You were warned about this," he said. "Now you are being suspended for 2 days, beginning Monday." My heart dropped. I had already been suspended for shoving Shelby, which was what had led to me running away in the first place. What would Mom and Dad say? Even though Mom believed my story, would she excuse my behavior? And what about Dad? He didn't even believe my story, so he would just be pissed that I was such a terrible example to my younger siblings. I would be grounded for sure. That meant I wouldn't be able to see Billy for who knows how long. I had to change Mr. Cunningham's mind. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cunningham," I said. "Please don't suspend me for speaking my mind." He shook his head. "No, Morgan. It's too late for apologies now. You've already done it, and your actions have made our school look bad. Your behavior is unacceptable." My shoulders slumped. There was nothing I could do. "Get your books out of your locker. I'll ask your teachers to contact you with the assignments you'll be missing, as I expect you to have them ready to turn in when you return to school on Wednesday." This really sucks, I thought, but instead of protesting, I just nodded. "You may go," he said. "I'll call your parents in a few minutes." Great, I thought. Now I'll be in trouble before I even get home. With a frown, I stood, then left the principal's office and went to my locker. After getting my books, I found Billy talking to Rochelle in front of the school. Seeing my 2 friends waiting for me gave me a small boost. At least someone supported and understood me. Billy more than Rochelle, of course, but at least she was there. "Hey," I said as I leaned forward under the weight of my backpack. I set the nearly overflowing pack on the ground as I stopped next to my friends. Billy gestured to my pack. "What's with all the books?" I sighed. "I've been suspended for 2 days." "Oh no," Rochelle said. "That sucks," Billy added. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure my parents are going to ground me now." We were all quiet as we considered this latest development. "I know," Rochelle said, her face brightening. "Instead of going home, let's go to the mall." Since it would probably be a while before I would be allowed to go to the mall, or anywhere, I readily agreed. We arrived at the mall a short time later, and as we walked inside, I tried to forget about my awful afternoon. When Billy intertwined his fingers with mine, I smiled, happy to have him with me, always with me. "What do you want to do?" Rochelle asked. "Are you still not having snacks?" I asked as my stomach rumbled. She laughed as a guilty look came over her. "I kind of gave that up." "Good," I said. "Let's go to the food court." I frowned. "Before they take that away from us." As the 3 of us sat at a table and ate our food, Rochelle said, "I don't like this weigh-in thing. How can they force us to do it?" I thought about the rules in Billy's world. If you went too long without weighing yourself, you could be sent to a fat center. What would the punishment be if you refused to get weighed in our world? A small smile lifted my lips. What if we got a bunch of kids at our school to refuse? What do you think would happen? "Be prepared to get in more trouble," Billy said. I shrugged. "I've already been suspended. What's next? Are they going to kick me out?" He raised his eyebrows as if to say, "Yeah." "Maybe it's worth it," I said. "We have to take a stand at some point." "Let's do it," Rochelle said, her eyes bright. "Where do we start?" "We can all go on social media," I said. "We can say that we're going to refuse to be weighed and then suggest that everyone else refuse as well." "Good idea," she said. "We need to start today, though, because the weigh-ins start next week. We want to put a stop to it before it even starts." My earlier feeling of helplessness started to lift. Then my cell phone rang. When I looked at the screen, I frowned. It's my mom. Suddenly, I wished she hadn't given me the phone back. "Don't answer it," Rochelle said. I glanced at Billy, but he didn't give any indication as to what I should do. "I'll call her back in a little while," I said, "after we post everywhere." Rochelle took out her phone, and the 2 of us got busy posting our plan to all of our social media sites. Half an hour later, we were done, and I called Mom. "Where are you?" she asked. Her voice was sharp with anger. "At the mall." Get home right now, Morgan. Any power I'd felt while posting about our boycott on the weigh-ins was squashed by the knowledge that my parents still controlled my life. Maybe they'd even make me weigh myself at the school. Okay, I said. A moment later, I hung up. It would be better to talk to Mom face-to-face anyway. Billy and Rochelle were watching me. I have to go home, I said. I'll take you, Rochelle said. When we got to my house, Rochelle stopped at the curb. Do you want me to come in with you? Billy asked. No, I think I'd better go in alone. Okay. He got out of the car when I did and gave me a kiss. Good luck, Morgan. Call me later. I'm not sure I'll even be able to use the phone, but I'll call if I can. After they drove off, I walked toward the house, on edge as to what Mom would say. This has been Dare to Oppose Part 2, Parallel World, Book 4, written and narrated by Christine Kersey. Copyright 2014 by Christine Kersey. Billy and Morgan's story continues in Dare to Oppose Part 3.